Oh yeah, I'm going to take a few. Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
I tend to avoid taking them.
Oh, okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are, of course, in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. It's always such a pleasure to gather here to celebrate a new publication. It's particularly exciting when it is a debut novel from an author. So that makes this evening that much more special. It does seem a little bit odd to be celebrating Zilla's debut novel tonight, given that she's already been so acclaimed for her short fiction and writing in advance. It does feel like she already has this incredible body of work behind her. And all that incredible writing comes to a head in this wonderful new book, The World So Wide, published by Cormorant Books. As I have the microphone right now, and I'm legally obliged to always read any endorsement if it's written by Kinesia Lubrin, I'm just going to read a few words that she had to say about this book, as they will be inevitably more eloquent and insightful than my own. The World So Wide is a nimble, clear-seeing portrait of a generation's complex inheritances, proceeding and extending from the Grenada Revolution. As sharp and clear as a stream in sunlight, The World So Wide is Jones's beautiful, musical, astute, and richly earned entrance into the tome of vital Caribbean diasporic literature. You'll be hearing a little bit more from that book in just a moment. It's always lovely as well when a book has not even been launched yet and is already on our bestseller list. So that was particularly exciting. So many of you will have already had the opportunity to make the acquaintance of Felicity Alexander, and if you have not already, you are in for a treat. There'll be a reading from up here, followed by a conversation to my left. And if time permits, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So please do allow those to percolate over the course of the evening. If we do go to a Q&A, I will approach you with this handheld microphone, not because we don't trust you to project, it just ensures that those watching at home can hear your questions. At the end of the event, I'll be back with some more signing details. But for now, I have the great pleasure of introducing your host for this evening. Chimwemwe Undi is a poet, editor, and lawyer living and writing in Treaty 1 here in Winnipeg. Her work has appeared in Border Crossings, Brick, BBC World, and Canadian Literature, among others. Her debut collection, The Brilliant Scientific Marvel, published by House of Nancy, received the 2024 Governor General's Literary Award in Poetry. Yes, please applaud. I'm going to make you applaud for her again, so please stand by. She was, of course, Winnipeg's Poet Laureate, and she is now Canada's Parliamentary Poet Laureate for 2025 to 2026. Please give a raucous round of applause. Hi,
everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and an honor to be a small part of ushering the world so wide into our wide world. I'm going to be very brief and thanking McNally and thanking Zilla for inviting me to have this conversation. I feel really privileged to get to hog your attention and pepper you with the specific questions that I have. I'll try not to be too esoteric on the writing level. But before we get into our conversation, it's a real honor to introduce Zilla Jones. Zilla Jones is an African-Canadian anti-racist educator, a lawyer, a mother, and a singer of Caribbean, Chinese, and European heritage, writing here on Treaty 1 territory, lucky us. She was born in the UK and now lives here in Winnipeg. She's a winner of, get a piece of paper out. It's hard to keep track of everything. This is actually out of date. The Journey Prize, a finalist for the Writers Trust Bronwyn Wallace Emerging Writers Prize, recently named one of the Writers Trust Rising Stars for this year, and finalist, multiple time finalist for the CBC Short Story Prize and the nonfiction, Creative Nonfiction Prize too. Yeah, see, gotta write it down. Her writing has appeared in many literary journals, including The Fiddlehead, Manitoba's Own Prairie Fire, the Malahat Review, and Bayou Magazine. Please join me in giving a raucous welcome.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many supportive faces out in the audience. So thank you so much for making time. I know there's a lot of demands on everybody's time, so I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to start by reading a couple of brief excerpts from The World So Wide. So the first one happens in Grenada in the Caribbean in October 1983. So this is after there's been a coup. This is based on real events, so this happened. So there was a coup that removed the socialist government, replaced it with a maybe more hardline socialist government, and the original government is confined to house arrest. The US is going to be invading in a few days, but they don't know this yet. They suspect it may happen, but it hasn't yet happened. So they are under guard by the army inside Government House. So this is October 13th, 1983. Allison made oil down for dinner, the national dish of Grenada. She used breadfruit and coconuts grown on trees in the yard of Government House, and dasheen and herbs picked from the garden. The soldiers brought the salt fish and ham to the back door and stood, pressed to the windows, as the scent from the simmering pot seeped out. Felicity had always scorned domestic tasks. As a teenager, she had rejected her mother's tentative offer to teach her to cook oil down. Why would I want to do that, she asked. Oil down is a disgusting dish. The breadfruit absorbing the taste of the mishmash of ingredients surrounding it, the greasy liquid bubbling like a swamp, the thick, dark layer of burnt off oil settling to the bottom of the pot. It all made Felicity feel nauseous. She almost missed the sadness that flashed across her mother's face, but even when she saw it, she didn't change her mind. Felicity was not going to be a woman who wasted her time on useless things like cooking. She revised her opinions when the fragrance in the kitchen washed into her nostrils. She had overlooked the power that a cook held over the hungry. How one truly talented in the culinary arts could produce a reaction almost like sexual desire. Allison was a witch preparing a love potion. Felicity had been looking for an ally without considering Allison. It seemed obvious now. Allison was lovesick, like Felicity. She was an artist, like Felicity. Felicity got off the couch and went into the kitchen. Need any help? She asked in the doorway. Allison swung around from salting the pot. From you? She laughed, without warmth or joy. Felicity knew this wouldn't be easy. I thought we women might have some common ground, she said. You're a foreigner. You're not one of us. You haven't been through the revel with us. Allison laid down the wooden spoon she had been brandishing. I know, Felicity said. She would not argue the point, though she had, in fact, lived the revel night after night with Claude as he worked himself into ideological zeal. You're the one who has access to Neville. He listens to you, Felicity said. The words had the desired effect. Allison's face began to lift into a smile. We need this house arrest to end, to get back to our lives. There's got to be a way. There is, Allison said. She passed the knife to Felicity. You can cut those onions. Felicity tried not to show her dismay. She was very sensitive to onion gases. But she took her place next to Allison at the counter. Mark Henry wants to send someone to negotiate with Neville to figure out the terms of release, said Allison. And Neville won't? Felicity imagined the knife sinking into the flesh of the onion being drawn through Neville's neck. He was risking everyone's well-being for his own selfish pride. The Cubans don't want him to. Their leader loves Neville, thinks he's the only one who can truly advance workers' rights in Grenada. The Cubans don't have to live here, said Felicity. She turned her head to the side as a gust of tears splashed down her nose. Try this, said Allison, it helps. She splashed water over the onion. What does Claude think? Felicity tried to speak his name neutrally so that it didn't sing in her voice, didn't waken every dying cell in her body. Oh, said Allison, you know Claude. Felicity loved her for the way she said that, as if Felicity had a claim to Claude still. He probably has the entire terms of surrender written already, but he'll wait until Neville is ready, and then he'll hand them over as if it was Neville's idea. Felicity was appalled that this was still the pattern between the two men. Why does Claude put up with that? You should know, Allison said. He just cares about the result. He doesn't think he has the personality to carry the revel to the people, but Neville does. Claude wants to die for the revel, remembered Felicity. She blinked back more burning liquid. Wetting the onion had not really done anything to mitigate the effects. Well, exactly, said Allison. And if that's what he wants, then he's not going to fight that hard to save himself, is he? She took the pieces of onion Felicity had chopped, threw them in the pot, and gave the soup a fierce stir. I will die for it too, if that's what I have to do to be with Neville. But that's not what you want, is it, Felicity? And if it isn't, what are you doing here? Felicity wasn't so sure she didn't want that. Death had never scared her. She didn't believe in her mother's heaven. It would be terrifying to live forever, to have to be with the people you thought you'd left behind. She thought of death as a cool, dark, quiet room where you no longer had to strive or impress. Allison went to the cupboard. We can eat out of these bowls, she said, and I'll give them, she indicated the soldiers in the yard, the pot to eat out of. Why give them anything, Felicity asked. A hungry man is an angry man, Allison said. We don't want them hungry. Felicity remembered Anthony coming home from work at 7 a.m, 2 days after their wedding. She heard the front door open and then he slouched through the bedroom door, his eyes drooping with fatigue. She woke up and rolled over in bed, ready to give him a back rub, but he said, "Where's my breakfast, woman?" Breakfast? It hadn't even occurred to Felicity to prepare food at this early hour. She'd been hoping Anthony would give Mara her morning bottle and that they would both get some sleep. Then they would scrounge the leftovers from the wedding meal her mother had cooked and Felicity had crammed into the fridge. Felicity would feed her new husband food prepared by other hands and offer him her body. Her language was touch. That's what a wife makes her husband in the morning, Anthony said. Oh, Felicity said. No one had told her this was expected. I didn't think of that. You didn't think, Anthony's lip trembled. You didn't think. He slammed his fist into the door so hard that it popped off his hinges and smacked into the wall. He turned and ran down the stairs as Mara began to wail. A few days later, when Jack came by, he returned from using the bathroom and asked, "How do you get that hole in the wall upstairs?" We were moving furniture, we banged into it with a dresser, Felicity lied. And then I have a brief excerpt from New York City. So this is earlier, this is March 12th, 1977, and it is Felicity's debut at the Met Opera. Felicity was suffocating. Every breath felt like her last. Every time she drew air, she sucked it through a pipe stoppered with ice. The light bulbs rimming the mirror of her dressing room fractured into jagged chips of brightness that scattered onto the black and white tiles. When she stood, the floor sloped upwards and the walls squeezed inward. The flowers on her makeup table wavered as they bent their heads in her direction. The petals detached from their stems and floated upward, forming new bouquets behind her vibrating eyeballs. She was suffocating, and she'd waited too long to save herself. She took the back staircase, her crinoline-lined skirts in one hand, her score in the other. The air backstage trilled with the energy of the final moments before curtain. Stagehands hurried about adjusting ropes and wires, and from the orchestra pit beneath the front lip of the stage, the steady whine of the oboe cut through the dissonance of string players perfecting competing scale passages. Careful not to disturb the intricate loops the hair department had spent hours pinning into her wig, Felicity opened the stage door crack and stuck her head through. She fumbled inside the corset of her silk ball gown to retrieve the precious package that she'd stowed against her left breast. She lit the joint with the matches that nestled under her right breast and tried not to smear her lipstick as she savored the sweet smoke. The stage manager's voice crackled through her headset above the din from the orchestra. "Miss Alexander, curtain in 15. The general manager, I'm skipping here. The general manager had summoned Felicity's office before the evening run-through. 3 days before the Sitzprobe, the first rehearsal on stage with the orchestra, Felicity had taken the adagio marking at the end of the B section as a chance to add some ornamentation, as her vocal coach had suggested. The conductor did not attempt to understand what she was doing. He brought the orchestra to a halt. Let's have none of that, he said. Just a slight slowing, but sing through. I thought, they don't pay you to think, said the conductor. The chorus spread out in the audience for the moment, snickered. Felicity withered. When the aria began again, she ignored the conductor, made the adagio even slower and more ornate. He wrapped his music sound with a baton. No, he said. No, 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 no. Again. The third time around, Felicity did not slow at all, but made her voice bored and flat and exaggerated the beat in a peasant-like style. Enzo glared, but did not stop. In the general manager's office, his eyes were breathtaking in their complete lack of warmth. This is your first time here, Miss Alexander. If all goes well, the Metropolitan Opera tends to enjoy long relationships with its principal artists. But if it does not, well, he drew a line across his neck. You follow the conductor's tempo or you will not sing. Do you understand? Miss Alexander, came the stage manager's voice through her headset, still transmitting at this distance, heard in 5. She knew what she was going to do. There was really no question. She didn't want to sing at the Met again if she was just to be a body, not paid to think, expected to follow some puffed up pretender. When they reached the adagio, she slowed down. She felt the conductor trying to catch her eye, trying to whip the orchestra ahead of her, but the players were professionals and they melded their lines to hers. The beat relaxed, the conductor's movements matching her breaths. The audience breathed with her too. At the close of the aria, they gave her a standing ovation, unusual in a dress rehearsal. The conductor laid his baton on the stand and scowled.
Thanks for that reading, Zilla. Tell us, how do you feel? It's your first book. You're here. All these people that love you are excited or have read, or excited to read, or have already read the book, or at the edge of their seats. How does it feel to be here today?
Yeah, it's something that was a long time coming, I guess. I've been to many other people's launches in this space and seen other people launching their books and not knowing if I would get to do that. So now we're here. So it's been a long time coming. It takes a long time to launch a book, as you know. So it just really feels like the hard work and all the anxieties and everything just kind of leads up to this moment. But it's very exciting to be here and see everybody here.
Can you tell us a bit more about that, the hard work, that process? I know reading your bio, you've had all of these successes, which are the public facing side of a writing practice, but I'm sure, especially with your busy career and your busy active kids, I see everything they do on Facebook. Tell us about, I read a little bit, I should say, about the sort of decision to start to focus on this part of your writing life. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always written, but I never really pursued publication until about 5 years ago. So that was when I decided that I was going to try to put writing out there for publishers and the general public. And so I started with short fiction, as you saw from my bio, and actually Prairie Fire was my first publication. I see Carolyn, the
Mine too.
editors here, Winnipeg Journal. So that was really exciting. And my very first story that I ever wrote really was the one that I submitted to the CBC Prize in 2019, and it was shortlisted or longlisted, sorry, in 2020. So that was a complete shock because I forgot I even sent it in. And then in the middle of COVID, I get this email from CBC, confidential. And that was really exciting. So I think once those things started happening, then I wanted more. So I submitted more and just kind of kept working on that. But this is a novel, it's not short stories. So often people will start with a short story collection that have a lot of stories like me. And I didn't do that. I went straight for the beast because writing a novel is a beast. Short stories are difficult too. They are hard in their own way. I actually think in some ways they're harder than novels because they're so precise and each word just has to matter, and they are not by any means an easy route. But a novel is just the stamina to write it is a lot, and the structure is so big, and just to kind of do that when I really like had no business doing that and really didn't know what I was doing and did it anyway. Angelina's here. She was my mentor, my first mentor through Mountain Writers Guild. I see Sharon's here from the guild as well. That was a huge support in starting this. So Angelina read my first messy draft, and she's probably seen how much has changed. But the core of what she did is still in, because the main thing that we did was, I had, I think, 5 points of view in this novel. And Angela's like, I think this is Felicity's story. I think that's what you need to focus on. And that was absolutely true. And so that is what I did after she suggested that. So it went through a lot of different drafts and revisions, and it's a lot to write a novel. So and then once you actually have a publisher, then there's like more editing, and it just never seems to end. And I'm reading it now going like, oh, I want to edit this and change this. So it's never really done. But yeah, it was a long process for sure.
You talked about Felicity and her point of view, and what a point of view Felicity has. She's a strong, opinionated, a woman determined to make her own way in the world. Can you tell us about Felicity, where she came from, and maybe how she came to be?
She's been in my imagination for a long time. So she's kind of a composite of different things. I think I read somewhere that the trick to writing is that you put two things together and a third emerges. And that's sort of what happened all through this. So part of her was the Grenada part. So she is the former lover of a member of the Grenadian government. And that was based on a family story that my mom is here, that she had told about a family member that was seeing the former head of the Grenadian government. And so I was wondering what that would be like to be the partner of somebody that goes on to such notoriety and then gets killed, and how do you kind of carry that forward and live with that. And then part of her is also the big opera diva. So I studied opera before as my undergraduate degree. And so I know a lot of singers and was kind of part of that for a little while. And there's such big personalities in opera, and so many just outrageous things that people say and do that are just normal in that world, right? So I always wanted to write a diva. So I kind of put the diva and the Grenada government X together. And then the third part that emerged was just this big, I think she's a feminist, very strong woman, very strong-willed person that kind of took on a life of her own when I put those two things together.
Tell us more. So this is, like, I think a lot of your short fiction, this is a historical novel. You talked about the rebel in Grenada. Can you tell us more about the decision and the process of writing a historical novel? What kind of research, what kind of combination of sort of external sources and the sources of your family came together in this book?
Yeah, I like writing about previous times. I sometimes write contemporary work as well, but I do like writing historic. And I think that we learn a lot from the past, at least we should. So I feel like although the world that I'm writing is one that is gone, the themes and sort of the lessons are contemporary, and they come back. So, I mean, especially in this book, we see that there's a lot of social justice movements, and there's anti-apartheid protests, and there's revolutions, and there's the United States trying to take countries over. That's also happening, right? Yeah. So it comes back and it comes back and it comes back. So it is historic, and yet it's not. But you're right that there's a lot of research you have to do, because I didn't live in the 60s. I don't know how people dress and did things. So you have to kind of check everything. And then of course you miss some stuff. So I get into editing, and my editor's going, you could have just direct call people. You have to go through the operator. So like when she makes that phone call, like, you gotta change that. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And they didn't have 10 pence, they had shillings. I'm like, oh, right. So, there's a lot of things that you just like have to remember that every little piece of this world is different. So you just have to really think about each thing. If they get in a car, like, why are they driving, right? If they're putting on shoes, like, what kind of shoes? So there's definitely a lot of work in terms of that. And then especially because I'm writing this Grenada conflict, I had to research that specifically. So I did know about it from family stories, but not everything. So I read, I think it was about 13 books that were written by a lot of the people that had been part of that government wrote memoirs. So I read all their memoirs just to kind of get a sense of what it was like for them and why they did what they did, and to get inside their heads a little bit for some of the conversations that they had. So there's definitely a lot of research that went into it.
Yeah, and I don't mean to emphasize the research and make it sound like the novel is homework. It really is, you're so grounded in Felicity's head and her feelings, and she's a really complicated woman, especially in the time that she's in. She might have had an easier time today, but the expectations that were on her in the time that she was alive, I'm talking about her like she's real, the time that she was alive, she was really sort of bucking against a lot of constraints, right?
Yeah, like she was definitely ahead of her time in that way, because she begins her education, her career in the 60s. As you know, that's a time of great social change, and that was when a lot of the social rights movements and women's rights movements were really coming to a boil. And so she's in this pressure cooker, and she's part of those movements. She goes to the protests, she faces sexism, she faces racism, she faces misogyny, misogynoir. She has a gay friend who faces discrimination because he's gay. So she sees all of this happening, and she struggles against that. And so I think as the reader, you root for her because you see her in this really patriarchal environment, even more so than ours, although ours still is as well. And she just refuses to be dominated or cowed, as you heard from the excerpt that I read. So she just somehow holds her own and stands up and just pushes back. And so she's a really strong character that way. And she pays the price for that sometimes as a result. But she is definitely, even though she's often put down by some of the other characters in the book, they think she's not devoted enough to the social struggle because she's in this opera thing and that's European and she has no business doing that. But within that world, she is very much a rebel.
Yeah, that's well put. You talked there about Felicity experiencing misogyny, racism, misogynoir, so like this sort of intersection of racism and misogyny experienced by Black women. And I'd like to talk a bit about race in this novel, which is complicated. It's a novel that occurs across different geographies, and the way that she experiences race as like a light-skinned Black woman is complicated by her different locations. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, Felicity is mixed race. So her mother is a Black woman from Grenada, her father is a white Ukrainian man, and he's not in her life. So she really doesn't know much about him, and she only learns about him near the end of the novel. She knows a little bit about him. I won't spoil that. But she is raised mainly in a Black environment, but within the city of Winnipeg in the 50s, which is not a very Black environment. So there's like the church has a lot of Black people, but that's really where they see them. And outside of that, she is different. When she's living in Winnipeg, and then she goes to London, UK. So London in the 60s, it's becoming more mixed because that's when a lot of Caribbean people are coming, the Windrush generation, as they call it. My mom came in that. And so she's exposed to a larger Caribbean community where they have a lot of social activists, and they do a lot of political protesting, and that's very much what my mom described as her life as a young person in London. And there's just this very exciting sort of international community that's developing, and they're fighting against apartheid, and they're speaking up and kind of being heard. So, but then the rest of London is still very, very British, and she faces a lot of racism there. She tries to get a place to live. She can't find a place to live because there's no human rights laws, and people don't have to rent you, and they don't. And then sometimes we're in New York City, which, you know, United States, and there's a lot of Black people there, but also a long history of exclusion, discrimination. And then sometimes we're in the Caribbean in Grenada, where her mom is from. So that is a Black community, but has suffered from colonialism. And so at the beginning of the book, we see how her family are estate workers and they're working on the land and they're essentially treated as if they're still enslaved. And they have to do this strike, which actually does happen in real life in 1958. It was called the Red Sky Revolution. That was when the workers all put down their tools and said that we're not going to cut any more sugarcane or bananas or coconuts or cocoa until we get treated with respect. We don't want to have to bow down every time the white master walks by, which they still had to do in the 50s. And the women used to say, which I read about, that they liked the leader that came along because he let them wear panties because they didn't have proper clothing. So it's a very deprived society. It's a very poor island. It's very tiny, and yet it spawns this great revolution that was inspiring America and Nicaragua and Cuba and all these other countries that were having socialist movements. And this tiny island of less than 100,000 people somehow was able to do that.
Yeah, can you tell us more about that revolution? Like that is, I'll admit, it's not a history that I knew very much about before reading the specific history of Grenada before reading the novel. And I understand you have some personal connections to it, and can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so this revolution was came out of all the people that began it studying in London. So they all came out of London law schools. They were Caribbean people, privileged Caribbean people who went and studied at Gray's Inn and Lincoln's Inn and all the temples at Middle Temple and the places where you used to study law in London, and then they came home. And because they had that education, because they had kind of seen the downside of Britain and the racism that they were dealing with, they were disillusioned about the colonial mother country, and they wanted independence for their nation, and they wanted a more equal and better nation. So they were trying to get elected, and they were being violently attacked by the guy who was in charge, who was essentially a dictator. And I know my husband, who's here, his family's Canadian, and his grandmother was actually like running from house to house for a long time, being chased by these people that were trying to kill them because they belonged to the opposition. And so that was the reality of what it was like. So then what they had was this non-violent takeover by Maurice Bishop, who took power without killing anybody. So they basically just went to the police stations, and there were so many of them that the police ran away and like wouldn't challenge them, and then they just left, and then they went to the radio and said, like, we're in charge now. And the dictator fled and went to the States, and he was gone, and everybody just accepted it and said, okay, I guess this is our new situation. So then one of my uncles, actually, who was a lawyer, was brought in from Trinidad to help them write a constitution because they didn't have one. And they were saying, well, like, what do we do now? Should we have an election? Because they would get elected because they were so popular. And he told them not to, because he said, you want to have a system that isn't just a colonial replication of what was there. You need to develop your own system for your own culture and environment. So you need to take the time to do that. So don't do that yet. And so they were kind of waiting to do that, and they hadn't had elections yet. And Ronald Reagan had a big problem with that. So he was saying, well, they're not democratic, like they're communists. And then because they were developing different industries so people could make a living, they were developing tourism on the island. Grenada has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and people love to go there. But one of the problems was that they didn't have a runway that could land jumbo jets. So you had to fly to Barbados and then take like a small propeller plane, and only a few people at a time could come. So they wanted to extend their runway and build a long runway, and they got Cuba to help, because what Cuba does, which is really great, they still do it now, they help a lot of countries in the region. So I don't know if you recently heard that Mia Mottley, who's the very fierce, speaking of fierce women, leader of Barbados, the US threatened her that Cuban doctors shouldn't be coming to your country anymore, because Cuban doctors go around the islands and help people and run clinics, just out of the goodness of their heart, and then they go back to Cuba. And they told her that she shouldn't use Cuban doctors anymore. She said, well, I'm not going to do that, so do what you want, because we need these doctors. So Cuba does that. They lend assistance throughout the region, and they were helping to build this runway, and the United States took a position that they were doing that to land warplanes. And it's an act of war, and they were trying to threaten the US, so they started this war of words. And that put a lot of pressure on the government. And then they started having these disagreements about ideology. So then the coup happens. And then when that happened, the United States said, oh, now we have to go in there to straighten things out. So they went in.
And some of that is the backdrop
Yeah.
of what's happening in the novel.
Yeah, so some of that is there. And you had asked about race. So to come back to that, because Felicity is mixed race, because she lives in these different worlds and she has lived in these different countries and she travels, she's kind of a person who exists in different worlds at the same time. So she's never fully in one world, she's never fully in the other. So when she's around some of the Black characters, they make fun of her because she's lighter skinned, they question her commitment, they think that she's bourgeois, they think she's spoiled, they think she doesn't get it. She's not really one of them. But then when she's in sort of the white opera world, then she's Black, she's an outsider, she's different. She doesn't belong, like she looks weird, like why is her hair like that? So she's always kind of questioning where she belongs because she's not fully of one world.
Yeah, and another sort of theme, I guess, that I noticed in the, or attention in the book, is one that you're sort of pointing to, that Felicity in her own world is a rebel, is fighting against, the constraints and the structures on her in her own way, and other people involved in the rebel have a different opinion of how to fight, and so I was just very interested in the novel, in Felicity's activism through her art, like through the practice of her art, the way that she was opening the world up for herself and for others, in different ways. I'm like thinking about her, she has like this beef with this woman in the book, who she eventually, makes up for it in her own way. Can you talk about maybe the sort of different, maybe even in your own life, the different ways that you've moved your principles forward and now doing it through your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as Felicity finds out, many of these art forms that we love so much and hold so dear are European art forms. So the opera, the novel, the symphony, they were developed in European courts, and they have hierarchies and they have rules and they have constraints. And when you're writing a novel, of course, you're writing in a colonial language. So you're not writing in languages of Asia and Africa and indigenous languages. Generally, they're in English or French, Spanish, for us English. And so there is always that tension of wanting to write or be part of something that maybe wasn't for you. And so that's what Felicity is dealing with. A lot of people think that, well, why don't you sing jazz? Why don't you sing blues? But she wants to sing operas. It turns out, like, her dad, who's of European descent, loved opera. So it actually was in her bloodline the whole time, which is like the joke's on you, right? But that is the issue, right? Is that within these spaces, it's been slow maybe to carve out space for diversity of voices and for different people to speak. And we're now getting to the point where we're seeing that happen more, which is really exciting. Like, you go down, you can find the bookshelves and there's books by writers from all different backgrounds. But even when I was a kid, that wasn't necessarily the case. Like, it was really hard to find books to read that had different kinds of people in them, and like for children, for adults. So now we recognize that representation is important. Felicity's living before that time, so she's dealing with trying to find that representation, be that representation when there really isn't anybody looking like her reflected back at her.
I have a question. So maybe I said I wouldn't be too esoteric, but I have a question about two sort of recurring operas. Is that what they're called in the book? La Bohème, it's a sort of an important work for her, and then also the Aaron Copland opera. Can you talk about Tenderland? Yeah, and Laurie's song?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the title comes from that opera. So La Bohème is, some of you might have just seen that because Mantra Opera just finished doing it, and two Black singers that were excellent that performed in that. So La Bohème is the first opera that Felicity ever sees. So she goes to see that when she gets to London and she's still a student, and that's when she sees that, she says, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. And for those who don't know, it's really the story of some struggling, starving artists that are living in Paris, and they have no money. And then Rodolfo falls in love with Mimi, who has TB and she's dying, and she can't afford to really do anything about that, to get any medical care. And they break up, and then when she's dying, they come back together.
Yeah.
So it's a very tragic love story.
Crying
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like the quintessential opera, because it's just got that romance, that tragedy, and that drama, and just and beautiful melodies and big orchestra, and just kind of everything that operas are kind of known for. It's set in France, in Italian, which is just a beautiful language to sing. And so that is kind of like when she sees that opera, then she wants to do that, and then she later makes a movie of La Boheme, where someone in Hollywood decides to cast her in this movie, and she makes this movie of La Boheme, and through that movie she meets a talk show host that she gets into a relationship with, and it's like her first serious relationship since she broke up with Claude, the Grenadian revolutionary. So it kind of brings love into her life that way, but she ends up choosing her art over love in that particular case. As the characters in La Boheme do at points in the opera. And then there's this character Musetta in La Boheme, who is a very selfish, big personality. If you guys have seen her, she sings Pondo invade, she steals the show, and she wears this big dress. Felicity is essentially, she's Musetta. So for much of the novel, she is also outrageous, loud, demanding, all of these things. And what happens with Musetta at the end of La Boheme is that she shows a very selfless side. So she's the one that goes and sells her beautiful clothing and jewelry to get medicine from Mimi. And then all the characters are like, oh, you are a good person. You are a good person. Because they didn't really see her as that till she shows how selfless she is. So Felicity has two Musetta moments as I look at them in the book, where she does selfless things. So I'm not gonna say what they are, because spoilers, yeah. But she has two moments, one sort of near the middle and one near the end, where she does something for other women. In both cases, she's a woman who's very focused on men for a lot of the book, and most of her friends are men. But then when she has these Musetta moments, it's to help other women that she feels could use a helping hand at that time. So we see that she has that compassionate and loving side to her as well. And so that's of course of La Boheme. And then in terms of Tenderland, the title comes from The World So Wide, is from an aria sung by this character. So Laurie is an 18-year-old, essentially a hillbilly. She's from the rural part of the US, and she's from a family where nobody has ever really had an education or seen the world, and she's the first one to graduate high school in her family, and she's going off to see the world. And that's what she sings about, the world so wide, because she's going out to the wide world. And so Felicity also goes on this journey where she leaves Winnipeg and goes to London and goes to New York and has all these adventures. So that kind of is a theme that comes throughout. And then because, you know, where she ends up is in the tiniest of places in the world so wide. Like Grenada, you probably won't see it on a map most of the time. It's a speck. But to her, it's such a big part of the world.
Yeah, love that. Did the title come first? Did the title come first, or?
The title was very early.
Yeah.
I had this title for a long time. And it's funny because when you sign with a publisher, they have in the contract, you know, we can change our title if you want. So there's always that caveat that it might not remain, but he was like, no, I like your title, like, are you keeping that? But it was funny because then I just like realized, like almost forgot that we're like close to publication. Like, I don't think we got permission to use that line, did we? So we had to go and do that like a week before publication, because we just had been so used to it that it seemed like it was my line, but it's not my line. It's the librettist line from the Tenderland. So but we did quote it and get the permission for it. But yeah, it was definitely a title that I just lived with for a very, very long time.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time for some questions. Anybody have a question? He's gonna appear. There he is.
Hey, Hillary.
So Zilla, a lot of us have gotten to know you in the context of the Winnipeg court system.
Yeah.
And we see you in the courtroom as a dynamic, and the courthouse coming down the hallways. You breeze through that place. We see you in the courtroom telling, often the stories of others, to advocate for them, right? Not to be their voice, but to amplify it. How was it to not have a file to read, to come from scratch? How different a world is this for you? And we're still gonna see you at the courthouse, right?
You will still see me in the courthouse for now anyways. But yeah, I mean, I think that in a way, you're right though, like what we do in court, and you do the same thing, with youth mostly, especially with them, I think, is we tell stories. So we try to humanize people that maybe are not always the most liked by society. And Wendy, same thing, and Alison, you guys know, right? And Philippe and Cheryl. So our people are not the standard heroes and heroines of life, right? But they have these great stories, like often very tragic, often very heroic. Some of our clients tried very, very, very hard to overcome huge obstacles. And it's our job to take that and make it real for a judge who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with this kind of life. So in a way, that is what a writer does, right? Like you take something that, like who would want to read a story about, this crazy opera diva that, like does all these like bad things, right? But you make her, well, like you take a character, and I know like some people that have already read the book have said to me, like, sometimes I just want to take her and slap her. Just like shake her. And then other times, like, I'm rooting for her. Like, how does that happen? That this person that like says these mean things and like steals other people's men and like doesn't care, then you're just like, I just want her to get through this. And I think that is kind of what we do in our jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That made me want to read it more.
My kind of person.
So you're very busy in the legal world, also as an international leader and going to conferences, and then you take on this book while you're a mother. So I can see your son's hiding in the corner there.
I'm not allowed to talk with them.
I told them that everyone here knows me because of the Facebook post. But how do you hold on to being a mother when you're so busy?
I mean, family comes first. So, yes, like it seems like I'm busy, I am busy, but I'm never too busy for them. So I still go to all the concerts and all the soccer games and all the competitions and all the school stuff. I don't miss that stuff. I can't think of much that I've missed, that I make that a priority, that that needs to happen. I remember that I actually saw the confirmation hearings for Judge KBJ, first Black female US Supreme Court justice, and she was asked that question similar by Cory Booker. And when he asked her about that, she said, well, you just have to make sacrifices, and sometimes you miss the birthdays, and sometimes you miss recitals. I was like, like, not me, like, I would not. So if something was requiring me to do that, then I wouldn't do it. So yes, I'll go and do a conference, but I come back. So yeah.
Yeah, and your kids are busier than me, so.
They are very busy.
Yeah, and more accomplished, honestly.
Hi, you've told us about your own familial connection to Grenada, so that's a starting point, but I would like to ask you why Grenada for this story, and situating it in the period of the rebel and the US invasion and occupation. I was involved in the solidarity work for Grenada. I was in Grenada in early '83 when they were celebrating the history of the party and the revolution. And then I was there again just 17 days after the invasion with a group of international development agencies that had been working in Grenada. So we went to see, how the folks and groups and so on are doing that we had been helping, and we got arrested by US Marines, and very fun. But anyway, so my main point is why Grenada, and what is the story about the revolution and the people that you're telling this, or you'd like people to learn?
Thank you for doing that work, by the way, because that's really important. Development workers are so important, and we see them being attacked now, and it's such important work that is needed. But you're right, it's such a important story. So I mean, the Grenada Revolution is an opera, it is a novel. It just calls out to be told, and it really hasn't been that much. There are a couple of novels that address it. So I'm not saying I'm the first one. Like, but Dion Brown wrote about it in one, and there's one by Merle Collins from Grenada, but they weren't really widely read or widely received. They're not really being read now, and I just think it's a story that needs to be told and needs to be heard, because, as you've said, it's a cautionary tale. So I think when I was growing up hearing about it, it was always like, well, they got too cocky, or they just like didn't really see the reality of what was around them and just wanted too much. So there's kind of that aspect of it, that maybe they just overreached. And then there's also the aspect of, well, no, like they inspired, and if they didn't do this, who would? And just the fact that this tiny nation was inspiring people. The United States was scared of them, of this tiny country, and it took them days to take it over. So you would think they would just come in and that would be that, but the British fought back. And they really fought and cared about their land and fought for their country. And I don't think the US bargained for the fight that they got. And so I think it's really important for people, you know, my kids and people who descend from that, to know that we had such strong movements. And throughout the Caribbean, there's so many great stories. I mean, there's more that I want to write from many of the islands, but there are such great stories and such rich histories. And you have these tiny places that the world wanted, because the Caribbean at one time was the biggest producer of the biggest wealth, which was sugar. And that was why people were brought from Africa there to work, and people came from all around, from China, from Lebanon, Syria. So all my ancestors were coming there from different places to make their fortunes in these tiny places, you know, with the pirates, right? So and then we get to the now where they almost are forgotten, and they're just kind of like, you go to the beach in Jamaica and like have a time, and that's really all people know about. Maybe they know about Bob Marley, but people don't know a lot about the history of this region. And I think it's just such a rich and interesting history. But I didn't want to write a historical dry textbook. I wanted to have fun with it and kind of make stories with it. So that was why I chose to write a novel about it.
Sorry, pirates?
Well, pirates in the Caribbean, right? Like there was like, well, there were pirates like all over the place. Yeah, because there was so much wealth. So there was pirates that were sailing around, and you know, so you have like all the, like, they're interesting. The pirates are so interesting, and the movie doesn't do them justice at all. Like, the pirates were actually some of the first democracies. They allowed women to be leaders. They allowed Black people to be leaders. They had multiracial councils. They were really, really interesting, but they're kind of either portrayed as bad people or just kind of these like with the patches, right? But they were actually a very democratic institution that was very counterculture, and yeah, they're fascinating. So yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff.
Sounds like there's a book.
I want to make some time for the online, because I know we have, I think we have a class. Are they still there, Carrie? I don't know if they have any questions. There were some young people, I think, online. Can we see if they're around? I don't know if they are or not, but just if they have any questions. The kids, I wanted to answer that, but there's also a question back there. If there is, guys, throw it in the chat.
So while this may be a little bit like not really directed upon this book, basically considering I've also watched a documentary on racism. It also involved the famous professor on racism, Ibram Kendi.
Oh, Ibram Kendi, yeah, Ibram Kendi, yeah.
Considering what's really your opinion on the re-elected Trump, considering that his focuses on
Someone have to go there. No, it's fine. I mean, I think if you read the book, you can probably tell where I likely stand on that. I think that we're living in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's definitely a lot of division, and there's a lot of rhetoric that is very divisive around that. And I think that the arts is kind of a space where we can get away from that a little bit. So I really believe in the humanity of everybody, even the ones we don't like. And I know at times it's hard to remember that. But I think when we write, it's my hope that everyone will read this book, that Trump lovers will read it, that non-Trump lovers will read it, and they can all find something in there, hopefully, that will change them. Because sometimes when you read a book, you change. I guess there was no response. They might have left.
No.
So.
So I'll defer to you folks for any closing comments.
All right, well.
Oh, one more question? Yeah.
So we have one final question and then we'll just move along to closing comments.
What would you say was your inspirations or motivation in writing this book?
That's a very good question. I think it was just a challenge initially, because I always loved reading. When I was a kid, I was always encouraged to read a lot, and I was one of those kids that just reads. And I would read books and go, I think I could write something like this. Like, I think I could do this. Like, I think I could do just as good a job. I want to try that. So I think it was partly just a challenge for myself. And then, as I said, I think it became, you know, I really want to tell this story, and I really think it's a story that needs to be heard and that I want people to read. And I think for me, the big, I think for all writers, right? Like, number one thing we want is to be read, for people to read your book. So I mean, yes, there's awards, yes, there's other things, right? But you want to connect with people through the written word, and the way that you've read books and they've connected with you and touched you, I want to do that. So when I see people here that are holding my book and I didn't read my book, that's so exciting. And I think I had a vision of that before. So I was like, you know, if I do this, maybe like a few people will read this. So I think that was a big motivator and inspiration and kind of a reason to keep writing.
We're very glad you kept writing, and now we have the will to write. I think it's a great place to end. Thank you, Zilla. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. I think John will walk us through, I mean, you have the last word, Zilla, but John will walk us through very detailed McNally copyrighted reading instructions.
Yeah, I won't be long because I know we need to move to that part, but I just want to thank you all again for being here, for all your support. There's been different ways different people here supported me. So obviously my family have been supportive and made time for me to write, and friends that are part of my writing community that we've discussed writing together. And as I said, Angeline Schellenberg was my mentor, and Mountain Writers Guild has been supportive in numerous ways. And everybody here that hopefully is going to read the book, you're lifting me up. So thank you so much for all coming out and being here. And thank you to Chim for great hosting. And McNally for the space. McNally is amazing. I've always wanted my book like on these shelves, and I want my face up there too someday. Yeah, and that's next. So seeing the book like on these shelves and on the bestseller list, showing the love that you guys have given the book is really exciting. So thank you so much for having me here.
It is a huge pleasure. So thank you so much, Zilla. Thank you, Chim. Thank you all for your attention and for your questions this evening. And thanks, of course, to Cormorant Books as well for publishing this book, without whom we would not have a reason to gather this evening, other than just generally celebrating Zilla, which is also always something we do. So in just a moment, we will be asking her to take her place behind the signing table. There'll be a moment of beautiful chaos while you all try to get into line. If the lineup is too long and you just need to remain seated. Good thing I work at a bookstore. Please feel free to do so. We won't rush you along. Please also feel free to have a copy of the book signed before you pay for it at the cash desk. Just please do pay for the book before you physically get it. There's just no need to rush back and forth. So I'm going to ask you all one more time to join me in very loudly applauding Chimwemwe Undi and Zilla Jones.